So next up, we have the very talented and passionate Dr. Robyn Madison-Harris, who also worked on this brief with our fellow who unfortunately is not able to be here today, Ashley Daniels-Hall. And I will say in advance that it was the EPFP course that influenced one of the panels that we are hosting today, and it came out of their work and their concern around accountability metrics for alternative schools. So Dr. Robyn is going to present their brief to us, and then we're going to transition into a panel that further expands on that theme.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Robyn Madison-Harris, and my esteemed colleague, Ashley Daniels-Hall, is away on school business. She works at Renew Accelerated High School, and she's responsible for test proctoring, and so there's still makeup tests going on. So more extreme duty called for Ashley. We were together really late last night preparing to speak with you all this morning, and then she found out that she wasn't able to make it, so she sends her regards. So the title of our presentation is Accountability for All. The subtitle is Revamping Accountability to Accurately Appraise All Schools. So I just had a thought. I probably should do a little introductory thing like Celeste did. So I'm Robyn Madison-Harris. I was originally a teacher. This is my 21st year in education. Originally, louder? Oh, I'm sorry. Is that better?
Yeah.
Okay, let me use my outside voice. So originally I was a teacher. I taught language arts, high school language arts in the beginning of my career. Grew into a school principal where I did, my school was an alternative school for adjudicated children in Baton Rouge from the ages of 12 to 17 years old. By far my favorite position of them all. So I bring some passion into this. Nalia was giving way to my passion, and I'm going to try to harness it for today. But I was an alternative school principal. After that, I went to work in accountability at the Department of Education, trying to also move the agenda of accountability in the state, but infuse the alternative or the non-traditional school concepts into accountability since I had that point of access. And then after doing my terminal degree, I went to work at a place called the Southeast Educational Development Laboratory that maybe some of you have heard of. And we kind of got acquired or bought out by the American Institutes for Research, which is a huge mammoth organization that's national and international. That's full of about 1,800 very talented people trying to work for the bottom line client, who are the most needy, most historically disadvantaged children in the country and in the world. And so just wanted to throw out a little bit of an introduction. So in terms of this accountability topic that concerns me, the problem that, as we stated, was that accountability scores don't accurately appraise schools and have negative impact at all stakeholder levels, right? So accountability as it stands, as we see it happening at our state level for our schools, it's not giving a holistic picture of what's really going on in schools. That's the position we're taking, and we're saying that it has negative impact at all stakeholder levels. First of all, students, imagine how students feel when they get up and go to an F school every day. Imagine the impact of going around the nation and hearing, well, hey, kids in Louisiana are performing at the bottom of the barrel when it comes to state ratings, things of that nature. So we take the position that accountability as it stands has a negative impact at any stakeholder level. This work has been going on for a while. I've had this notion of working on trying to figure out better ways for accounting for schools that are not traditional schools in the state of Louisiana. These conversations happened back in the Cecil Picard and the Paul Patton back in the Cecil administrations. There was a Bulletin 111 that I used to have to write for my job, or edit for my job, that gained the Chapter 35 about alternative schools. particularly finding ways or supposedly trying to find ways to account for students in the OJJ schools or Office of Juvenile Justice schools, like was my school, Baton Rouge Marine Institute, back in the day. The concern around non-traditional school accountability has emerged again during the John White administration after many years of these negative school labels without the complete and appropriate appraisal of school happening. And so from that re-emerging of this notion, a study group was formed by the board where they visited many alternative schools in the state. And from that work, there was a report generated about core principles around which alternative schools should operate. And I'll switch back to more information about that in just a moment. We always want to talk about data, and frankly, I'm just going to say we have two sets of data when it comes to these accountability notions that we're proposing. We have data that are included in accountability scores that look like this. The school performance score looks at grade level content mastery, state assessment, end of course testing. College and career readiness is looked at, the cohort graduation rate, college entrance exams, the ACT only here in the state, and then college enrollment. Those are the general data points that are rolled into accountability scores right now. I contend that there's lots of missing data. Personally, my partner, Ashley, is an instructional coach at Renew Accelerated High School. In my work at American Institutes for Research, we were able to get a little bit of work done at CF Raleigh Alternative School in terms of redesign. You'll hear from that principal who I've befriended and who shares passion with me a little bit later. But just in working with Ashley and in working with this school, here's a laundry list of data that are missing from accountability, but are valuable to the complete appraisal of a school and what a school does for students. So I'll kind of go through this list so you can see there are multiple things that could be captured in accountability that are not currently. And for the people who challenge metrics and measurability, we can just about figure out how to count or do a percent on anything. So I'm just going to say where these may appear like vague or some people may challenge measurability, there are ways that each one of these examples can be measured and included in an accountability system. And I'll share a little bit more later about how a couple of other states in the union are doing that. So for example, the provision of tiered services to students isn't measured currently. Schools that have low pupil-teacher ratio, they get no credit in accountability for this. Schools that provide instructional coaching for teachers, accelerated instruction for EL students or for gifted and talented students or advanced students, even remediation for students in need. None of that is captured, but yet is offered at schools. Teacher efforts contributing to school success, professional learning communities for student data analysis, assessment, quality and content knowledge improvement, counseling services, social emotional provisions made for students, the arts, as Ashley spoke to you about how important that is, gardening, culinary course offerings, restorative justice, drop-off preventions, the list goes on, community partnerships. All of these things contribute to what is offered to a child at school. However, the accountability system does not measure or demonstrate that these other very important things, in addition to these things, they're not being measured in schools. So remember I talked about the board convening a study group, and from those visits and in their research and their talking, I think they did even go, I think they went to CF Raleigh, is that right? There was a group with several policymakers and people who work in trenches trying to do what's right for schools. There was a study group where there were visits. They wrote this report, and they came out with two core sets of information that I want to point out here. They talked about these core components of effective alternative schools, but when you read, as we go through them, I want you to just think about if we have these core components, not just in alternative or non-traditional schools, but in all schools, wouldn't that be great for our children? And many times we do have these things going, but again, not reflective in the accountability system. So we talk about core components for effective alternative schools being addressing climate and culture, collaboration, counseling, curriculum and instruction, eligibility and placement, parent-guardian engagement, program evaluation, staffing and professional development, and then transitional planning for students. Those are the core things that should be happening in an alternative school according to the study group report. But again, think about, this has the curb cut effect. When I say that, meaning like somebody at the data center gave me the notion of when the curb cut was designed to help people in wheelchairs, but look how it benefits really the whole community, right? We can pull our luggage down, and for those of us who travel a lot, we use the curb cut for lots more things than people in wheelchairs. So my point is, the study group report findings about those core components, they can be expanded beyond alternative schools and into all schools and create effectiveness for outcomes for children. There were several guiding principles that were established in this same report around alternative schools, but think about it, when we go through this list, wouldn't these things, or don't these things really happen and could benefit all students at all schools? So these are the guiding principles. They say effective alternative education services, whatever those generally may be. Transitional processes and supports for students who are coming into the school, going out of the school. Appropriate academic services and career readiness opportunities. All children need those regardless of being at an alternative school or not. Effective teachers and staff with comprehensive training on academic, behavioral, social, emotional needs of students. Consistent data collection, prioritization of referrals to alternative education services, and community partnership development. So as I read this list, these things are great for alternative schools, but I still challenge that they're great for all schools. So here are our recommendations. First of all, I said, since the study group has done the work, produced the report, I would challenge that there's nothing in that list of core components, or nothing in that list of core principles, guiding principles, that wouldn't be of benefit to any child at any type of school. So I said our first recommendation is to implement guiding principles at all schools, not just at alternatives or non-traditional schools. And then a second recommendation I have is that we in Louisiana should begin researching and modeling Louisiana accountability after other states that will give a more holistic and accurate school appraisal. So for example, in California, they're using for alternative or non-traditional schools the same indicators that they're using in all schools, but they're allowing for differentiated measures. So accountability has academic indicators, English learner progress, graduation rate, suspension rate, college and career readiness indicator, and chronic absenteeism indicator. All schools are judged according to those things, but I put an example up there for the graduation rate. Rather than being dinged or penalized for having completers who didn't complete education within the cohort years or the 4-year cohort, they're crediting these schools with having graduates or having completers, so they're not being penalized as they are currently in our system. California is just a state that I've done a lot of research with, but not worked personally with. I'm currently in my position at American Institutes for Research, working with Texas, the Texas Education Agency as a client. And what they're doing right now is they're piloting a local accountability system with 19 districts. Formerly there were 20, but there was one that had to pull out for resource purposes. So right now they're piloting in 19 school districts a differentiated local accountability system with 5 different types of schools in each district. So this might end up, if my math is correct, this might end up being like 95 different ways of measurement across these districts. So I know people at the state level are like, oh my God, how do you control that? So that's where you do sampling for auditing and also going through the process. We are at ARR working with these districts, with researchers on how to quantify these things appropriately for all the measurement challenges that I know are out here. So what they're doing in Texas for this pilot is they're looking at 4 different domains: academic, climate and culture, extra and co-curricular, and future preparedness. Those domains are gonna make up 50% of any school's accountability score, and then the state score will remain, the state score calculations will remain the same and make up the other 50%. So whereas in California, there might be the whole sweeping, our accountability metrics look different in all these categories. In Texas, on the other hand, the big categories, the big buckets are the same, but they differ across districts and across school types. So we're working with them on making sure that components fit into domains and metrics appropriately occur for each one of the different components within those domains. So these are some good starting points where we in Louisiana can begin taking a look at how we can more fairly appraise our schools. And Ashley is a great resource to work with for this. And I always point to myself as part of the solution. So whenever, as we press through trying to make this point that this is very urgent work to do, I'm volunteering myself to be a part of the solution, to moving towards something more effective and more measurable, to have the curb cut effect for all of our children in Louisiana. I think that's about it. Any questions? Yeah, I'm looking around the room and I'm seeing all these familiar faces in there smiling at me. So I really want to acknowledge them. So I see Patrick Dobar in the back, who's one of my professional sponsors at the Louisiana Department of Education when I was there. And then I see Jennifer Bayard, who when I was at the alternative school, she had my back, working at the district office in East Baton Rouge Parish, but still caring about my little bitty school, my 70 kids, who are all adjudicated, who all had the same needs. And so I just wanted to make sure I acknowledge those people. I mentioned Andre Bonifant, and you'll meet her. She's gonna be on the panel, and she welcomed me into her school and didn't shove me out, and I kept wanting to come back, and we're trying to work on me coming back. So I just wanted to reach out and acknowledge the professional sponsors of mine in the room. Nalia and Julia, your support during this fellowship program, it's been priceless and valuable, so thank you all. If anybody has questions, I'll take those now, or comments. Silence means agreement. We're going to make some changes in accountability. Now I see 3 hands. Okay. Yes,
I'm really interested in these ideas of these kind of intermediate outcomes like chronic absenteeism.
Okay.
And it seems like such a great way to get schools to immediately care about getting their kids to school. And I'm wondering if you've seen either in these states or at AIR some research about how that changes what schools do in order to improve those immediate outcomes for kids in that immediate environment.
So I'll talk, thank you for your question. Hers was about chronic absenteeism and how people go ahead and try to address some things that can happen a little bit more quickly than other change. So for example, I remember working in accountability and telling people, you know how we always penalize kids, if you tardy 3 times, that's gonna equal an absence. So it's like, that's dinging you in accountability. Stop doing that. Have some other kinds of interventions for kids who are constantly late. Or figure out why they're late. I mean, figure out that they had to get their 4 or 5 sisters and brothers ready and off to school before they could. So maybe offer some extended time for the child. So there are ways that we can access all the important stakeholders around children for, hey, if we know chronic absenteeism is a problem, we don't solve it by dinging ourselves in accountability for it, right? We ask kids, what can help you come to school? You know, how can we help? Sometimes it's stuff that there are things that we can basically and easily do. So I would always say, start with children, start with a stakeholder group around the school, and hey, identify these issues and what can we do about them now? We can do that outside of accountability, right? And immediately. And then when we see that it starts looking good, then we have the argument for, hey, we need to get credit for this because we've brought up we've reduced our chronic absenteeism by such and such, all because the school community got together and we did something about it. So let's figure out how to put it into a metric and credit us for it. Thank you. Yes. The lady and then the gentleman. Okay.
Hi, Andrea. Thank you for your work. It's incredibly important. I'm curious, so one of the things I'm noticing is oftentimes we talk about how very unique our system is, which it is, and that sometimes is a way of like limiting our ability to actually create accountable systems because we don't have models for what that looks like elsewhere. So I appreciate you taking pieces that can be replicated here, even though they're not the same model. So just want to say that. I'm curious if you have seen, or if, I guess I'm wondering to what extent climate and culture, where would you see teacher, student, and parent voice kind of finding its way in some of these adjusted accountability measures?
So I'll share with you. So here's what we're working on with Texas. So there's a repository that we have at ARR where there's a repository of viable survey instruments, and some of them are for parents, school stakeholders, period, about their perceptions of school climate and culture. And so the reason why we point you to those viable instruments is for the people who challenge measurability of the ones that we just create on our own without having them vetted. But there's also in that same repository the opportunity for people to submit their surveys, get them vetted by ARR staff, and clean them up so that they become a viable instrument for measuring parents, student, community stakeholders for the perception of climate and culture. So in Texas, that's what we're encouraging. People are using surveys that are already deemed viable to collect that voice that you're talking about, and then or are creating surveys that they will use like in a subsequent year in their accountability system iteration, so that they project student, parents, community member, staff voices with those perceptions of school culture and climate. So it is happening, it is quantifiable and verifiable, and the service is also free. So that's another encourager for our schools to start taking a look at climate and culture. So there were, yeah, okay. Yeah. Yes, sir.
Dr. Harris it is.
Yes, sir.
Let me speak to your success from someone with a background, juvenile justice and so on and so forth. That shows that you have a special spiritual gift too to cultivate some of these things. I have worked with the juvenile justice background in my career myself. But let me say something to you. Whenever I read things like this, I'm kind of a tailored person. How much was this generated around what is happening here in Orleans Parish? Because I heard you threw out some states and some other ratios, and that's good. But I need to, as a parent as well, I need to see how much of that was centered around what we're doing here in Orleans.
So in general, I just talked about the whole state.
Okay.
But I do firmly believe this is applicable in any environment, and I do believe in New Orleans having its unique set of needs and unique set of things that I feel should be different in accountability systems. And because Orleans itself is a school district, and you have the multiple charters that will look different on different, in different veins of accountability, I still believe that you guys in any given district, particularly in the city of New Orleans or at any given charter, you can come up with your own ways of, I remember when I was in Texas, somebody said, what's there to stop a school district from doing this on their own just to give their own appraisal of their own school? So I feel the same way about New Orleans. When there are great things going on, what is stopping us besides conforming to the state system and just reporting, hey, you know what, this is our state score over here. Yes, it is. But these are some things that have not been measured by the state that we want to share with you. And I just challenge people to take that position and share some things, calculate and share some things publicly that are happening in schools that aren't captured by the system.
So we can use this as a how-to, in other words.
I think so, or at least a springboard for getting started. Yes.
I like that. Springboard.
Yes, a springboard for getting started.
Thank you.
Yes, and there was a lady in the back, and then I'm gonna take the young lady right here in the striped shirt. Yes, ma'am.
Basically, some of your answers to him answered my piece. I just wanted to throw out, we know research and consults and studies bring forth information, but how to apply it to what's happening in New Orleans is different. And the fact that you've worked, or the program has worked under 3 different administrators of Louisiana state education license, and so that's at least 13 years. We just wondered, again, how do we make this work when each of these charter systems of schools have their own autonomy?
Okay, so,
And they really don't want the public coming to their board meetings, or they don't make it easy for parents to come either.
That's good.
so her comment was around, it sounded like penetrate, how do you penetrate systems or schools? So here's my position on that. You have to have those willing parties, like the gentleman was talking about, things are happening in New Orleans that are good, or things that are happening that are unique to New Orleans that aren't captured in these types of systems. So where there's the will, I feel like there should be take the initiative to go ahead and try to expose those other things that aren't captured by the system. And I remember working at the Louisiana Department of Education, like right around the time when charters became hot in the state. When people invite you to the table, come. When people try to shut you out, there are plenty of other places that need your help, that are willing to try to take these kinds of shifts and these kinds of moves toward, a more fair appraisal of schools. So I would say go where you're willing, and then where people willingly accept you first. But then also, because what happens is once you start to demonstrate with other schools or with other systems that we're doing something a little bit different, that's capturing the more positive outcomes of our students in our schools, then it might infect those naysayers and those people who keep the doors closed. So if anything, I would just say be the example for those places by working in the willing territory. That's what I would suggest. And then there was a lady with the stripes and the gentleman right here.
I'm gonna jump in. We have time for one more question before we have to transition.
Okay.
Okay, oh gosh, you better be good. First, extending gratitude. I think this topic is really important. And I think the first thing I'll say is that I actually agree that our state accountability system is insufficient and incomplete. I did want to ask you a question, however, around your orientation to inputs versus outputs, and whether or not you're proposing that our state system seeks to assess the quality of inputs, because I really appreciated that list that you shared. But that list to me seems to exist at the altitude of strategies that should then drive,
Further
graduation rates, et cetera. And so I'm wondering about your beliefs around the relationship therein, because if that list was happening, my belief is that we should then be seeing those outputs. And so is what you're positing, is your recommendation that we build a system that seeks to measure both the output and then the quality of inputs at the state level? Or are you suggesting that assessment of the quality of inputs happens either at the school or on charter boards? Or what's your belief in the relationship between the inputs and the outputs?
So my belief in the relationship between inputs and outputs is that they're both necessary, right? So we talk about like the graduating of the rigor of an accountability system. So for example, in the beginning, we might just be doing counts and percentages. Is this stuff happening? How many times or how often? To what degree in terms of percentage? But then if we don't in turn look at the output or the outcome for students, then we can't just isolate the inputs without regard for the output. So what happens is over time you design your system to gradually do more of that. You set these weights for importance in the system. You set targets, and growth is the model for all the time. So you move from, okay, we're just doing these things, to gradually over time, how are these things impacting things like what your example was, graduation rate? Since we have these things in place, because what's measured is what's valued, right? We have these things in place as inputs, they're being measured, and then we're expecting growth in them, and then we can look at correlation as well for those outcomes. So the system should kind of move from left to right, from like down or baseline to up in terms of growth and make sure that it shows the connection between the inputs and the outputs or outcomes.
So you're saying that the problem in our current system is that it doesn't do that?
It's not measuring all the inputs that are happening. And what you don't measure, sometimes you don't give attention to. Think about you measure the test. So you walk into school, it's test prep every single day, all day for the whole school year, because that's what's measured. But if we start looking at some of those other very important inputs that could have impact on, for example, the test or graduation rates, then we start valuing more than just the test. Then we start going in schools and seeing all the other value points being exemplified because they're being measured and having impact on the outcomes for students in terms of tests, in terms of graduation rate, in terms of student and staff morale. We could just go on and on. So yes, the system I'm proposing is that we increase the number and the value of inputs and look later on in the system for growth along those and cause correlation to those outcomes for students.
Awesome.
All right.